Hey, today we're going to talk about 2.4, Ecological Tolerance. So take a moment, check out the Enduring Understanding, look at the learning objective, and you can pause the video and review the essential knowledge as you set up your Cornell notes. So ecological tolerance is basically described, or we describe it in the sense of like it's a range of tolerance. So it is basic environmental conditions that can enable an organism to survive. And in this example, I'm going to use temperature. So this little grid here, this can refer to like super cold, and this can refer to like super hot. So different organisms are going to have a different range in which they can survive. So going through this, like a polar bear is going to have a relatively narrow range, and it's got to be cold because they have adaptations that do not permit them to survive in warmer temperatures. Whereas we might have a cactus that is adapted to survive in warm and dry conditions. We have something like a mouse, which is going to have a wider range of tolerance. They can survive in cooler conditions and warmer conditions. We have a penguin, which can survive in cold conditions, but maybe can survive in slightly warmer conditions than a polar bear. And finally, we have humans, which have a very wide range of tolerance. And that's just because we have invented and designed methods to keep us warm, to keep us cool, that can enable us to survive in more extreme environments. So we're going to use the mouse as an example. So there is a temperature right here. At this temperature, whatever this temperature is, it is within the mouse's range of tolerance. So I am looking at the individual temperature and or the individual environmental condition, and I'm finding out, is it within that organism's range of tolerance? So in this situation, a mouse would survive because this temperature is within the mouse's range of tolerance. Now, if I were to increase the temperature, so now it is much hotter, this mouse would not survive because the temperature is now outside of the mouse's range of tolerance. The mouse's range of tolerance does not change. You think of it in terms of are the conditions within this range or outside of this range? So a mouse has a set range of tolerance. Every species will have a set range of tolerance based on environmental conditions. So in this situation, the mouse is definitely going to be dead. But at this temperature, a cactus would survive because it is within this cactus's range of tolerance. So again, we want to look at the environmental condition and then see where the organism would fall. So you can think of it as a bell curve, and this type of graph is called a bell curve because it's shaped like a bell. And whenever we have the environmental conditions, we have the really extreme low condition and really extreme high condition. Populations are going to be very low at those points. And at the average condition, the population will be the highest. And some examples of environmental conditions can be temperature, which I showed you, salinity, which can be the amount of salt in a body of water, dissolved oxygen, low oxygen, high oxygen, amount of sunlight. You can also have pH. There's other conditions as well. You could have CO2 levels. You could have chemical pollutant levels. Any different, there's lots of different examples, but these are some of the more common ones. So there are these, you might see it in other sources. You may see it color-coded. And this color coding, we have an optimal zone. So this is the preferred zone, the preferred conditions for organisms to survive. This is where they can survive, they can feed, and they can also reproduce. In these zones, an organism would experience physiological stress. And instead of saying it's bad for an organism, you say that the organism undergoes physiological stress. So if the temperature gets too high for a mouse, for example, the mouse will likely not survive because it is experiencing physiological stress. And maybe the mouse might not be able to reproduce in these conditions. So typically that is something that happens. When you get up here to this zone of intolerance, organisms cannot survive. because they are outside of the range of tolerance. And you may have a couple of individuals surviving, and that's just because there is slight genetic diversity, but the populations will be incredibly low for a species at these extreme conditions. So this zone in between the physiological stresses is considered the fundamental niche. And this is basically the ideal where they could survive. However, you're going to have other conditions in there where you're going to have predators, you're going to have available living space and other conditions that is going to make it a realized niche. So this is where the organisms typically would be found. And a niche is, we don't really use the term all that often in AP Environmental. You probably learned it in living environment as the role within an ecosystem, but it really is all tied into range of tolerance. So instead of using the word niche, we really try to use range of tolerance. So I'm going to show you a little example. We're going to try to write a typical response to a question. So I want you to make a connection between a human activity and climate change. So climate change is when the temperature increases. So one thing we could say is burning fossil fuel releases carbon dioxide, causing global temperatures to rise. Okay. Now, once the temperatures have risen, something might happen to this tree, for example, and the new temperature now is outside of this tree's apparent range of tolerance. So, to continue on with my response, when global temperatures increase, the resulting temperature is outside of the range of tolerance for many species of trees, causing a population decline. So this is just a very, very basic way of using ecological tolerance, using range of tolerance in a written response. So what I would like you to do to practice is to explain how human activities can lead to biodiversity loss. Newsflash, use the vocabulary word ecological tolerance or range of tolerance. I hope that this video was informative. I thank you for your attention, and I will see you soon.